The first thing that has to be decided is by President Biden, whether he's going to run. If he decides not to run, then of course the entire field opens up in a way that, we don't have a good roadmap for, because it's not the normal scenario. But could donors get behind a new candidate? Yes, of course they could. And this is the conversation that everybody is having pretty much around the clock since the debate. But so far, what we know, and I suspect we know a lot less than what's actually transpiring, is that the Biden team are locking in. But watch this space. One more very significant stumble by President Biden, that would be difficult to recover. And the very bad scenario is that happens far too late to make a change. There are a lot of people now that think that the vote for Donald Trump is just going to be much stronger, that people will stay home, that we're sort of on the fence and thinking about maybe voting for President Biden. This is a very risky period. And come September, when politics and students and America is sort of back from the summer, it's going to be a very difficult campaign season, a very difficult politics. We're a little bit on hiatus through July and August, even with the conventions.
Is there no more smoke-filled rooms because there's a monopoly of a family that runs a given party? I don't want to get Democrat, Republican here, but there used to be a conversation nationally with cigars in hand among a party. Is that like a fiction now where it's just run by, the critics would say, the president and the first lady?
Those conversations are happening. Of course they're happening. They're happening out of sight and certainly out of hearing distance. And this is why, everybody over the weekend who's talking is saying that the Biden team is locking down, that they're going to keep President Biden on the ticket. And maybe that's the case, but they're certainly not going to say, well, we're not sure. Imagine the volatility, uncertainty at a time of two major wars, a China threat, a whole amount of global disarray, dysfunction, polarization. You don't send the signal until or unless you've made a decision. We will hear nothing from the top unless they make that decision.
Leslie, what's going to happen at this convention? It seems like Tom and I need to pay attention to this convention coming up.
I think we all need to pay attention to this convention. We can imagine a couple of different scenarios. We can imagine that it just sort of you're talking obviously about August and not about July. In my view, it's a shame they're not reversed in terms of the timing, but August, it could just go as planned, or we might be in a situation where we are looking at Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, a number of candidates whose names are out and about. Kamala Harris, obviously, perhaps just staying as a vice president with somebody else on top. There are all sorts of scenarios and conversations going on, but that, again, we know depends on the decision that ultimately President Biden will have to make.